This is episode 134 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, it would be nice to record one of these News of the Week episodes without having a new egregious abuse or expansion of government to talk about. But recently we've had free college being one of them. And Governor Lujan Grisham is just on a roll in terms of her ambitious agenda to expand the size of government. And the latest initiative is relating to loosely CAFE standards or vehicle emission standards. And this
along with miles per gallon as well, correct?
Well, that's the primary way that people will kind of come to grips with this whole thing. And it's really, really complicated. She did not make this simple, nor did she, as seems to be the case with the higher ed college proposal, give a heck of a lot of details, because I looked on the governor's website and the press releases, executive orders, not that clear in terms of either proposal. But we're here to talk about this week the mileage standards. So here we go. By 2022, the governor wants to make every car sold in New Mexico get 52 miles per gallon. So that is a long way to go from where we are now in this country. And I would assume that New Mexico, because we have older cars, and I'm assuming we have bigger cars because, the American West, we're going to be more into pickups than folks in New York and DC. And if you move out here from the East Coast, it is quite noticeable. Or if you go back and forth and travel a lot, we just have more space, more people are out doing ranching and agriculture. So anyway, 25 miles to the gallon thereabout is the average for the U.S. fleet as it stands now. And before I bring you in here, Wally, there's so much kind of complicatedness with this. So the EPA under Obama had proposed 54 miles per gallon by 2025. So the governor is beating out Obama by 2 miles to the gallon for whatever that's worth. It's not as aggressive, but okay. But 3 years, I think that's the critical thing, is that unlike Obama, who would be safely long gone writing his memoirs and traveling the world on private jets, Michelle Lujan Grisham will still be in office if and when this policy takes over. Now, President Trump, dealing specifically with the Obama era standards, in his ever-forgiving Trumpiness style, he did not completely obliterate the entire regulation. Instead, he took it to 37 miles per gallon. That is the new standard as per the US EPA. Now, there's a lawsuit with California and the Trump administration and the EPA that I'm not really going to go into. But even California has a 51 mile per gallon by 2025 standard. I don't understand why they even can't get their own stuff together. So 51, it's 1 mile less aggressive than our governor for California, but 3 years further out California has. So get your scorecards ready. I know it is amazing, but this is a very aggressive push by Michelle Lujan Grisham. And, while I will bring you in here, does she even have the right to do this? Doesn't the legislature have a final say? Anyway, lots to unpack. What do you have to say?
Well, the first thing I want to say, and we saw this in industry after industry during the Obama administration, is they would put out these hyper-aggressive environmental regulations that everyone knew there was no way no way at all, 0.0 chance of them being achieved. But I think, I don't know their motivations, but it seems like they try to say, well, if they don't get there, they'll work really hard over the next 2 or 3 years to do everything they can. And then as far as they get them, we'll change the regulation and push them along again. It's not based on science. It's not based on a plan. It's certainly not based on economics. And then when you talk about a place like New Mexico, what does it mean? 52 miles per gallon means a small hybrid. That's what it means if it's a gas burning. There's nothing else that will work. Small hybrid. That's fine. If you live in a big city, a small hybrid, a lot of people don't have cars. They use Uber, they use taxis, they use public transportation when you live in a dense place, AKA not New Mexico, because public transportation doesn't work here very well. So what does this even mean? I don't know, but man, it could cause dramatic damage to New Mexico. And then the key is this going forward? How do, and this is a New Mexico and a Western thing. Do pickup trucks and large sport utility vehicles get their own category? Are they in there as well? In which case, the number one selling vehicle in most Western states is some brand of pickup truck. In New Mexico, I believe, is right in there with that, and it has been for years. And so are you saying, and I saw in your boats, if you like your pickup truck, you can keep it? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Maybe they'll change the rules. But this is one of those, I don't know what you call it, aspirational policy. We wish this would happen, so we're going to make it the regulation, and then we're going to figure it out all in the future, as opposed to maybe doing something that's rational. It seems like it's a lot of the former and very little of the latter.
Yeah, and like I said, the governor is going to be in office, well, more than likely when this comes about. We have governors in this state that tend to get elected consecutively. So if she's in office for 8 years, she will have to deal with this. We'll see what legal questions are asked and what court cases might happen about this. I've got to suspect that folks in the agricultural community, folks in the oil and gas industry, and this is the first direct shot she's taken at that industry. It's kind of an indirect shot still because it's not a direct, you can't get oil and gas out of the ground here or there. But if you're in the industry, transportation is where your fuel's used. Natural gas is used in a lot of electricity generation in the home, but oil is the bread and butter of New Mexico's economy. And this is a direct shot at that by taking on transportation. New Mexico is not going to make a difference in the grand scheme of things, but she claims there's 13 or 14 other states on board with similar plans. California, even if they commit and are able to achieve a 50-plus mile per gallon fleet, that is going to have a tremendous impact on New Mexico oil and gas producers. And of course, just like the agricultural community, Wally, I know you travel to places where they have oil and gas guys out there. They are not driving Priuses. They're not even driving, Honda Accords or Ford Mustangs. It is very significant pickup trucks that are going out on these dirt roads to access oil and gas wells. And that's going to be another group of folks that are impacted by this. So I really, at this point, am most interested in the legal question. How does a governor abrogate the authority or garner the authority to impose such a far-reaching, significant regulation upon New Mexico's economy? Is that really legal? And I think it's up to us, perhaps at the Rio Grande Foundation, maybe some other nonprofits or advocacy organizations, to find that out. So stay tuned. We're going to be working on yet another brand new big government scheme right here in the land of enchantment.
Yes. A lot of these things, if you just don't listen too intently, don't understand the details, when you look at the chart, just kind of unfocus your eyes. You're like, yeah, wouldn't it be nice? And that doesn't usually turn out to be the way it is. And this is a very interesting one. And so taking away pickup trucks from New Mexicans may not be a real wise political move. And as you say, she committed the cardinal sin, put together a proposal, a policy that the actual downside of it would come to fruition while she's in office. That's not how you do things. Not smart politics. But I'm glad that's the way it is. If this were to happen, at least she will be around to answer for what it has to offer the state. And there used to be a saying, something as goes GM, so goes the U.S. economy. Certainly, way diversified from that. But if something like this were to catch on in the short term, I think it would be a massive disruption of that industry as well. And it's car dealers and people maybe holding on. And final thought is, are we going to be like Cuba? We're going to keep our old cars that we like, that work how we want, as opposed to a little Prius pickup truck.
Yeah, the tax on new vehicles that they increased in the last session will be the least of our problems if people really decide, I don't want to buy the new cars because they're not going to do the things that I need to do or want to do. And of course, New Mexico is, I would say, about half the states, according to USA Today. We're right in line with those other states where the most popular single vehicle is the Ford F-150, folks. That is a heavy-duty pickup truck. California, the most popular vehicle is Honda Civic. That's a different situation over there in California. Looks like my home state of Ohio, even, the Honda Civic is pretty popular. So, you have states with some agriculture, but also a lot of big cities where those smaller cars like the Honda Civic are prevalent. But New Mexico, you got a big pickup truck that people are relying on for traveling around, for getting through some rough roads, oftentimes getting out to feed cattle and go to the oil wells and all the kinds of things that we all know trucks are great for, that, small car is not necessarily cracked up to.
Well, yeah, and what strikes me before we leave this topic, if you look at the top vehicles shown in each state, green is the Ford F-150 on the USA Today map that you put on there. That looks a lot like the electoral map for the presidential election. And so maybe I will tally up and see if you won all the F-150 states. Does that get you the presidency? Ooh. Because it looks a lot like that, where the states that have the most popular are the ones that tend to. And again, there's some notable exceptions there, but that tends to be the electoral college states that voted for Trump in this last election.
There you go. Well, that's a fascinating study. We'll have to take a look at if you win the F-150 vote, do you carry the nation? I don't know. Another issue that will be on this will be on the fall ballot. It's Albuquerque Public Schools looking for $290 million in the form of a bond measure. The idea, of course, is that back in January, we the people of Albuquerque rose up. The Rio Grande Foundation was certainly pleased to be a part of that effort to prevent a very significant property tax from being imposed on the local electorate, local homeowners, but apartment dwellers would have been lumped in there through higher rents, et cetera, et cetera. And I was asked to sit down with Channel 7 and talk briefly about this. I'm sure this news story or some variation thereof will come about quite a few times over the next month and a week between now and Election Day, as voters go to the polls in a different style of election. This is going to be uncharted territory, if you will, Wally, for a lot of these school board elections, not just in the city of Albuquerque or Albuquerque Public Schools District, but around the state as new election laws kick in. And for the first time, there will be no special schools-only election. You'll have a much broader electorate turning out for votes on bond measures. And with how roundly defeated APS was, now granted it was a tax increase, but $290 million for school constructions, for turf, for fields, and those kinds of things. Yes, I think anyone who has their children at Albuquerque Public Schools wants better school buildings, but we also know that the district is so horribly mismanaged, misallocates funds, builds $20+ million fancy facilities with refrigerated air for the teachers to go and train in, and then sticks the kid in buildings with non-functional air conditioning units or swamp coolers. And there's a lot of frustration. Now, the question I have is, will the frustration lead to changes at APS school board? Because those are the people who at least can put us on a firmer path, a better trajectory in terms of the financial management of the district. But will voters go along with the $290 million bond measure? Are they going to have faith restored into APS? Was it just the tax increase, or are people really concerned about the way APS is managed, Wally?
No, you brought some great points up. And the fact is it was a kind of a mail-in ballot, the one that they were defeated. And it was a kind of transitional measure that the legislature allowed as we go to now these bond elections being held in much more broad-based elections where there's more electorate. It's not easy for the teachers themselves to just control the vote.
The truth is, Wally, that APS could have waited till the fall, but because they wanted their money sooner, they paid for the mail-in election. And that was, I think, maybe a component of the concern or outrage of the citizens, because we could be voting right now on that full tax increase package, but the district powers that be, the school board, said, let's go ahead and do this right away.
Yeah, and the other thing is, my perspective was they did not make the case for why they needed all these additional funds. And what's interesting is the election isn't that far in the future, and I'm not sure they're doing a very good job of making the case now. Now, they are doing the tried and true, this won't increase your taxes. That is almost, what would you say? That's the minimum level of outreach you can do in these sorts of elections. It won't increase your taxes. Now, they don't say your taxes would go down if you didn't vote for it, but it's status quo. I haven't really noticed a lot of anything above and beyond that. And it will be interesting to see whether they're just going to use that kind of lay low and hope for the best, or whether they're going to get out there and get in the community, talk to business groups, talk to community groups, get out there in a place where the media can actually ask questions ahead of time, try to garner support. Or are they just going to cross their fingers and just hope for the best with their bare minimum of outreach effort?
In our criticisms of APS's infrastructure handling would be the same, although to be fair, we have a lot of other issues on our plate, democracy dollars being one of them locally. We would like to see changes at the school board. It is frustrating, as somebody who has two daughters at Albuquerque Public Schools, to see the misallocation of resources, et cetera, et cetera. But the Davis-Bacon rule, APS does not say anything about the absurd cost increases associated with construction of school buildings and other public works projects, thanks to the Davis-Bacon rule. Ohio had a situation where they repealed the Davis-Bacon law for just school construction, and they found that Ohio saved 12%. This was like the Legislative Finance Committee, but in Ohio, finding that on school construction and school maintenance, the district saved 12%. Now, maybe it's higher in New Mexico, maybe it's somewhat lower, but shouldn't those dollars be in the classroom, not paid to well-connected lobbyists and the union allies in the legislature? They should be getting rid of LEED, L-E-E-D certification, which is an absurd and arbitrary way that you give yourself a pass to say, oh, we're doing something for the environment, when in reality, LEED has very little to do. And we have a study on our website showing that LEED certification doesn't really do much to make a school actually less energy intensive or more green. Stuff like putting a bike rack out front.
Right.
If people don't ride the bike, you're just wasting metal, so you're actually making it less green. And there's various other ways that you can get LEED certification. And then modular architecture for new schools is a third one, which is, Del Norte High School is the prime example of a building that just the cost went way out of control. I know we'll disenfranchise the architecture community, but we should have a basic modular design for schools that's still attractive, that you can make adjustments for needs, but not have to go and sit down and create new plans. And finally, the district is seeing its student population plummet. Why are we maintaining the same amounts of buildings as before when less and less kids are going to some of those schools? We can do something about those unneeded schools, shift kids into schools that are, newer, better able to handle the student population, rather than maintaining some of these older school buildings, because these predominantly schools over in the Northeast Heights, where the population, especially of younger people, has shifted away from towards the west side, where you don't have as many school facilities and you do have more crowding issues. So those are some of our critiques. Like I said, we're going to be kind of keeping a low profile in our own regard. We'll be explaining those, but our concern is that we've got to have school board members who get these topics and are willing to stand up to the unions and the establishment, put them on the school board, and avoid necessarily, having reform initiatives foisted on APS by just voting down tax increases and bond measures. We're not going to tell folks how to vote. I know how I'll vote on APS's bond, but I think it's worth taking a really close look at those school board members.
Yeah, bureaucracies in general, or any large organization for that matter, some of the largest corporations in the world, tend to really fall short on the flexibility element when conditions change. There's many retailers out there, starting with Montgomery Ward's, Sears has gone through that, Kmart. There's a lot of things where the markets shift and then they're really slow to change. As you say, APS is not growing anymore. And I think their whole mindset and their whole infrastructure plan, and much of that is designed for a growing district. Well, because New Mexico's not seeing much population growth, we're seeing an aging population. We have our own economics problems that keep people from moving here and staying here. They don't have as many students, but I'm not sure they've fully come to grips with that, what that really means. And as we have talked about on an earlier podcast, a similar situation I think is starting to become very prevalent in our higher education system as well. And so this is turning into the pervasive kind of problem that we're at this point doing the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil approach to, that is going to need to be addressed at some point before it just gets totally out of hand. And these sort of things left to their own devices can not only be millions of dollars of problem, they can be billions with a B if you don't nip them in the bud in a timely basis.
Well, I appreciate all of your comments there, Wally. Of course, Montgomery Ward and Sears and Kmart did successfully in quotes, they closed stores because they really didn't have any options, because unlike APS, they don't have access directly to our pocketbooks. They closed their stores because they didn't have the money to keep themselves open. Ultimately, they fell apart and are relegated to the dustbin of history. However, the U.S. military has actually created a viable process by which it can close its old facilities and unnecessary facilities. It's called Base Realignment and Closure, BRAC, and it's what resulted in the shutdown of Walker Air Force Base a little over 50 years ago down in Roswell. And the fact that the U.S. military, which is not exactly known for having agile, nimble bureaucracy, they can change and create a process by which they can save money and reallocate resources to more urgent needs. If the military can do it, APS should be able to do it.
Well, what just popped into my mind, the School Realignment and Closure Commission, SRAC. We need New Mexico SRAC.
Or APS rack. I don't know.
We'll think
we'll
about
go that
it.
one on the drawing board, yeah. But we need some politicians who are not implacably tied to the status quo, and that's the first step. All right, democracy dollars, Wally. We're back with that one because, first and foremost, it's worth noting that we at the Rio Grande Foundation have a website dedicated to educating voters about the democracy dollars issue. This will be on the ballot. 2 different questions, but I think the second one is the critical one. Its web address is nowaynm.org, nowaynm.org. But the front of the website has, I think, my favorite line of this particular campaign, which is "Go fund yourself," and it is an effort to educate people in the city of Albuquerque who will be voting on this horrible democracy dollars idea. I'm not going to go into it again, but it's another way that politicians are trying to tap into your pocketbooks to fund their negative campaigning and negative ads. It is really not a healthy system. It's going to rely on left-wing special interest groups, et cetera. Pat Rogers on this very podcast, local attorney and activist, did a very good takedown of the democracy dollars proposal. But Mr. Rogers has made the offer, which still stands, and if any lefties out there or advocates for democracy dollars would like to step up to the plate, they are welcome to do so, because we cannot get any advocates for democracy dollars to step up to debate Pat Rogers on that issue. They are more than happy to send their notices to the Albuquerque Journal and other news outlets, but they are not willing to debate Pat Rogers on democracy dollars. And we were ready to support and sponsor this kind of thing, but the left is afraid, and I think justifiably so. I think it's, quite frankly, illegal, poorly worded. It's a bad system. I do think that the voters, much like the APS tax increase, will vote this thing down, but we're going to keep making the case against this horrendous democracy dollars idea. You know, politicians should not, in general, on principle, have access to our pocketbooks. I'm not a fan of public financing for that reason. Campaign funding is not an easy issue to address, but if you've got the support, if the public is behind you, you should be able to go out and get your dollars. And then, you know, if folks who are voting don't like it, then they can not vote for you based on their low opinion of the people funding your campaign. But it shouldn't be the taxpayers.
Yeah, and that's Rio Grande Foundation Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast episode 129. And like I say, there may be some great arguments for this. We certainly haven't heard them from the left, and Pat Rogers made some stunningly good arguments against it in terms of what it would do, not only from a policy point of view, good governance point of view. Man, this thing costs a lot of money. And the one that was like to add insult to injury on this is that not only is it cost a lot, direct dollars, giving it to these candidates, the administrative cost of this thing looks like it could be out of control. Maybe cost $1 of administrative cost within the city of Albuquerque bureaucracy to administer $1 of actual advertising or campaign support. Just crazy how inefficient that process would be.
You got it. And Pat Rogers and Eric Griego, the Working People's Party, some leftist outfit here in New Mexico, did a tete-a-tete in the Albuquerque Journal editorial pages a few weeks ago. And the thing that made me laugh, aside from the arguments and Pat Rogers eviscerating Eric Griego, is Griego, a professor at UNM, said that it was a boogeyman, but not B-O-G-E-Y-M-A-N, the B-O-O-G-I-E-M-A-N. And
an allergy or cold-related boogeyman.
Oh, I was thinking it.
Like the boogie. Okay, either
doing some dancing. But yeah, as the parent of three small children, I should have thought about the boogie, the other kind of boogie. But there you go. Yeah. So you can go read that Albuquerque Journal head on head between Pat Rogers and Eric Griego, and I think it's an open and shut case on democracy dollars. And if you want to send nowaynm.org to your friends, family anyone who will hopefully be voting on this issue, educate them, because it sounds, democracy dollars, it sounds lovely, but the reality is not so lovely. And it was a busy, busy week, Wally, with all of our news coverage and speaking out, I should say, about the governor's plans for free college. We're not going to rehash that entire issue, but the governor did put forth her plan for free college, and we been in on 770 KKOB a couple times with Bob Clark and Brandon Vogt. We're on the local news on KOB Channel 4, Santa Fe, New Mexican, Las Cruces Sun News, and a wide array of news outlets discussing the challenges and the flaws in this particular proposal. And I think, especially in the New Mexican piece, the reporter sat down and talked to a number of, informed folks on this issue, including Senator John Arthur Smith. And I think there's a lot of questions about what the governor's trying to do on free college, and hopefully we'll ask and continue to find out more about this proposal as the legislative session approaches. And Wally, again, I've asked the governor's staff for data on how they came to this $25 to $35 million cost. Crickets. So we're going to have to file a public records request with the higher ed department to see where they actually came to this figure from. And, eventually the legislature will get a hold of it and they'll have that discussion, but we shouldn't have to wait till January to have a frank discussion about what this plan is really going to cost and where they got their assumptions. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I completely agree. And, just the cost of, quote, free government programs over time tends to expand, grow, escalate, and get out of control. And to know what it is today is a big piece of the equation that is, if you can't have that as a starting place for your discussion, you can't have any meaningful discussion that involves any kind of fiscal responsibility, much less good logic and good public policy.
Yeah, and I think, the governor, when she came into office in January, maybe she thought that's the way it was going to work all the time. She could come in, early January. It's a tight window when a governor takes office and when the legislature starts. And she didn't have to really propose a lot of stuff. It just was there, ready, waiting for her. The legislature acted. She could say yay or nay, I support or I don't support this, but she really didn't, aside from the Energy Transition Act, have a lot to say about a lot of the issues going in. You kind of knew that she supported it. She gave her blessing to a lot of these ideas, but it was really all about what bill she signed or vetoed. Now she's trying to build her own agenda, and she's doing it in a very untransparent, ungood government way. And I think that's very frustrating. And it's also a challenge to the people in the Democratic Party and the legislature who do genuinely, I think, support good government, but they also philosophically support the governor. I think there's going to be a conflict soon with regard to the governor's kind of lack of willingness to actually share what she's making her decisions on. The same can be said about the miles per gallon thing. Are legislators really just going to go along with that because they support the process? The Energy Transition Act's another great example, the lack of transparency there. So,
yeah, it will be interesting. A lot of, as we say in politics, bold new ideas. That doesn't mean good new ideas always, but there's no question they're bold. But boldness without, a little bit of a what would it mean? How would it work? What are we really doing here? It's becomes like a popularity contest, not basically good Democratic Republican form of governance here in New Mexico.
Yep, and Christmas is threatened, Wally. Can you believe it? We're only here just at the beginning of October, and Christmas is in the crosshairs of radical environmentalists from the Wild Earth Guardians. Now, you may not necessarily know why that is, but it has to do with the fact that the Wild Earth Guardians don't believe that the U.S. Forest Service is adequately protecting the spotted owl in New Mexico's national forests. So they have gotten a judge to place a moratorium on all logging and timber collection activities.
Yeah, all timber management. Anything you do.
Nothing.
Yeah, just quit.
Which includes that this year it was supposed to be, I believe, the White House. Now, maybe it's the Capitol, but they always get a tree from a different state. I mean, not every state has the kind of pine trees native to them that you would put anywhere, because, my home state of Ohio, they don't have pine trees in that state. But it's one of the two big Christmas trees that would be placed. I think the White House is this one. But you have the real, where it's hitting home is people who collect firewood and use it to, frankly, heat their homes all winter and need that as a source of heating in the winter. They are going to be really facing some problems. So this, I think, is widely acknowledged by even the Greenies in New Mexico's congressional delegation, Udall, Heinrich, Ben Ray Lujan, Deb Holland, and Social Torres Small. All of them have gotten together to write a letter to the Forest Service saying, please, please, anything but the traditional firewood gathering and restoration, fire mitigation projects. So interesting discussion here. Again, in New Mexico, it's so often a battle between left and further left. There's not really a conservative voice at this table, but we're going to put one there right now in this podcast. But I wanted to give you a chance to comment on how you see this whole situation playing out.
Yeah, the wild, it's just ironic, to put it mildly. The Wild Earth Guardians has advocated for old growth forests at the expense of almost everything else. They want to kick off all the ranching, all the mining, all the oil and gas, all of the timber activities. They seems like every time there's a timber management to do some sort of a fire break or thin or do a prescribed burn, they're always against it. Well, what have we seen in the last 10, 12 years here in New Mexico is massive wildfires. And so and who did that hurt? That was the primo spotted owl habitat that burned down because of policies that Wild Earth Guardians advocated. And now a lot of these timber efforts, I happen to know close to Albuquerque up in the Jemez on a Forest Service road, you're allowed to gather burned and down wood from a earlier forest fire. So you're actually taking that out so it doesn't burn again. You're getting some use out of it as opposed to just a waste. That's one of the activities they're shutting down. And the spotted owl has always been a very interested endangered species. It's endangered, but it's everywhere. So its habitat is always needing protected far and wide, and the Endangered Species Act, it's one of those, let me just say, I am for every endangered species having a chance to live. But the Endangered Species Act has been a tool of the far left organizations like the Wild Earth Guardians to just get this weird policy thing that at the end of the day, my objective analysis of their goal and mission is they want to kick all human uses off of the vast majority of Forest Service lands and publicly controlled lands in the United States. And that includes a big chunk of New Mexico. And so, yes, this is one of those, once you take away people's ability to cut their Christmas trees and get firewood to burn their homes, maybe it'll get some attention. But this is a symptom of a bigger problem, which is how this Endangered Species Act gets so abused and preventing good policy on our nation's forest lands, Bureau of Land Management land, et cetera.
I will first and foremost give a shout out to the Silver City Daily Press, which ran a story indicating that it is the capital Christmas tree. And I don't know, Wally, if you've ever been in the DC area around Christmas time, but I think the tree itself at the Capitol is a much lovelier tree than the White House tree. The White House tree is kind of so overburdened by stuff that it kind of looks almost like one of those Charlie Brown trees, the silver trees that they have. That is what I guess was commercially successful back when Charlie Brown was, coming out brand new, 1960s. The Capitol tree is much more of a natural, beautiful tree, but it was supposed to be New Mexico's turn to get a tree out in front of the Capitol this year. Unless this ban is addressed very soon, that ain't going to happen. Also worth noting is that, folks, the National Forest Service is a part of the Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Agriculture. That means you're supposed to use these lands for agriculture style timber sourcing and other activities besides just leave it and let it go like a national park. So we need to, I would prefer, quite frankly, and we worked in this vein towards trying to reassert state sovereignty over more of our lands in New Mexico. Over 40% of our state is tied up under federal control. It's just wrong that the federal government should control that much of any state. And it's more in other states like Alaska and Nevada. So we need to have a big fundamental shift in the way lands are controlled in this country. And maybe this will start that debate a little bit here in New Mexico.
Well, if you want to see what poorly managed forest land looks like, go look at much in New Mexico that's already burned under Wild Earth Guardians and other environmental group style regulation that really prevents anything from happening. The thing that I always like in public policy, as you expand, you say, well, is there an example of somebody who has done it well? And in New Mexico, folks, there absolutely is. The Mescalero Apache, their forest that they control in southern New Mexico near the town of Ruidoso is where their reservation is. They've done a lot of things that are just blatantly illegal on Forest Service land, but they've thinned out their forest. It's very healthy. You're getting more, fewer yet bigger trees. Your fire danger is going down. When right next door you have the Forest Service managed lands that are still at great danger to being burned down in large swaths, as well as damaging the communities and buildings and other things around there. And so, this continues to be an important issue. There's still more of New Mexico that can burn without good forest management, and this is just a step in the totally wrong direction.
Yeah, if you head south down to Ruidoso from Albuquerque, you really get the full force of that mismanaged situation down there. You're driving right through the burn scar on both sides of the road. There's very few trees. Now it's been a few years, so it's starting to look a little better, but you can see all that area that was burned. And lest you think that the Rio Grande Foundation is just working on New Mexico policies and with New Mexicans, I had the opportunity this week to share what the Rio Grande Foundation is working on and how we work with a international group of delegates, folks from Austria, Germany, Romania, Croatia, and even a Greenpeace employee from the UK. So, yes, Rio Grande Foundation attempting to break through to Greenpeace folks, but really it was more of a broad-based discussion on kind of how American politics work and what Rio Grande Foundation is doing and how we are organized relative to the policies and issues facing New Mexico. Periodically, I'll get a call from somebody with the State Department and they'll say, hey, we've got a group they'd like to meet with you. Can you set aside some time? So, a lot of these things we do very publicly, very directly engaged and trying to influence these issues. In this case, just an opportunity to share a little bit about our country and our state with folks from all over the world. These are, leaders of media outlets, analysts in the parliaments of these various countries. And of course, as I said, a green activist from the UK, from Greenpeace. And I'm sure they're not on board with many of our policies, but that's okay. I got to talk to them and they got to ask a few questions. So a fun experience for all.
No, absolutely. I have done things like that in the past in various informational exchange meetings with different industry groups around the country. It is always interesting to talk with people that are interested in the same sort of things, get their perspectives, and to the extent that we certainly believe that some of the ideas of limited government and free markets are really the way to push things forward. Pretty exciting thing to get to do. A lot of fun.
No doubt. Thanks for listening to this week's podcast. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter, and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.